Hi, Peter Charles here of Hooked for Life Fly Fishing. And today let's get into this issue of managing depth on the swing using tippet length and the type of fly that we're trying to swing, as opposed to always changing tips. Assume for a moment you've gone down a run, you haven't had any hits, and you think you're running too shallow. I think a lot of people would automatically change the poly leader or change the tip and make another pass down with the same fly and the same leader. There's nothing wrong with doing that, but you are wasting some time while you're re-rigging. It gets tedious after a while, and I do this myself, and I'm sure lots of other people do it. You've gone down the run and you thought to yourself, oh, I haven't touched a fish. I think I'm running too shallow. To hell with it, make another pass. And you don't make any changes because it's such a fiddle to cut the fly off, take the tippet off, take the sink tip off or the poly leader, and go through the whole process. So what I've got here is some alternative ways to looking at the problem and managing depth without really changing very much. And it makes it a much simpler proposition. So let's take this poly leader, for example, and let's say this is what I chose to put on my line. I tend to be very minimalist. I might go down with just this on the end of my line and nothing else. It's not uncommon for me to go fishing with very little stuff. So if this is not quite the right poly leader for my conditions, let's say the water is higher than I expected or lower than I expected, am I stuck? No, I've got lots of choice. So let's first talk about getting deeper. I've got two of my Bass Bunny bugs here, and they would work for steelhead. Okay, so the one in my left hand with the red bead has lead in it underneath it. This one here with the brighter bead has no lead. So this one's weighted, this one's not, except for the bead, of course. And so the red head here will swing a lot deeper than this one. It will get down faster. And as a consequence, I can juggle probably as much as 6 inches depth difference between changing out between this fly and this fly. Very handy, and if you get in the habit of doing the same pattern, but some with lead and some without, some with tungsten, some with brass, and just color code it so you know which is which, it's a great way to make easy changes without really changing much in the fly. I mean, if the fish like this olive, but it's just not getting deep enough, you can still say with the olive. So that's a trick right off the bat, is simply have an unweighted or a weighted version of the same fly, just change a color somewhere in it so you know which is which. Now, what's interesting when you go along with poly leaders is, I mentioned this before, the back end of this is a type 6. This is a this is a super fast sinking. So the back end is about a type 5. The front end would be about a type 2. So now it does get down like this, mind you. It's not in a U. It is like this. But there's not a lot of sink rate in the tip. So what's interesting is that when you add a weighted fly to the end of a poly leader, you'd be surprised how much extra depth you get, because the front end is not density compensated and it's lighter than the back end. You can actually pull that front end down with a weighted fly. So by using poly leaders with a weighted fly, you can actually get a surprising amount of additional depth. Now, what's also interesting is we can extend our leader, our tippet section, off of the sink tip or the poly leader. People don't get this. They think you've got to have these little tiny short leaders on the end of sink tips or poly leaders. If your fly gets down on its own, you can go with as long a tippet as you can manage. So if you can cast a 10-foot tippet on the end of a poly leader, go for it, because you'll get extra depth. So if you have, let's say, an angle like this coming off your tippet, coming off your leader, well, say it right, Charles, coming off your sink tip or your poly leader, that angle will continue as I add tippet. It will still track down that same angle all the way to the fly. So if I've got a 2-foot or I've got 10-foot, I'm getting a lot deeper off the end of 10-foot than I am off the end of 2-foot from the same sink tip or poly leader. So just by extending your tippet section or your leader, you can get additional depth. Now, there is a limit to how far you can go, because when you're casting weighted flies, they do tend to be difficult to cast when the leader gets too long. So you'll hit an upper maximum, and you get to know where that is for your particular rig and your casting style. But I would say about 10 foot is generally about the maximum that you're going to get away with off the end of a sink tip or a poly leader, and you're using a weighted fly. Now, you don't always have to use weight. There are alternatives. You can use a fly like this. This is my baby perch pattern. It's very sparse, tied on a heavy hook, goes down like a rock, even though it doesn't have any weight. Now, the beauty of this type of approach is you can go with really long leaders off the end of your sink tips, and there's no casting problem because there's no additional weight in this. So it gets down very fast, and it stays down thanks to the up-eye hook. And I've explained that in other videos, why the up-eye hook helps us. But, you know, I've got no weight on this thing. Now, you could take the same pattern and add some lead to it. Again, same idea. Make a little color change so you know which is the heavy one, and you can get even deeper with this thing. What if you have the opposite problem and you're running too deep? You keep hitting bottom and you don't want to re-rig. Well, you can go to something like this. This is a very high drag fly. It has a very low sink rate, and your poly leader or your sink tip are not going to drag it down very far. So if you find that you are running too deep, moving up in drag and reducing weight will raise the tip of the fly line, the tip of the sink tip or the poly leader. It will raise it, and you'll be off bottom. So I could be going along with my perch fly dragging bottom, take the perch fly off, put this one on, I'm no longer dragging bottom. So all I've done is change the fly, and I've gone to a high drag, slow sink fly, and problem disappears. So when you produce a fly box, this is a Bass fly box, but some of these flies will work for steelhead as well. When you've got a fly box like this, you should have a mixture of drag rates and sink rates in here. So you can switch off one to another, whether you need to get deeper or stay shallower. High drag, slow sink will stay up. Low drag and heavy will get down. And you just flip between the two. Same with leader length, leader or tippet length. Longer the tippet section, the deeper the high speed sinking flies will get. The reverse is true with one of these high drag slow sinkers. You use a long leader, it's going to stay higher. So remember that, is that you can change your depth just by extending your leader, and you can get either make it stay higher or get lower depending on what you want to do. Yeah, with a high drag fly you will get a bit of a U going on between the end of your fly line and the fly, but if it's running high, that's really not that big a problem. And you'd be surprised how much depth change you can get just by making these changes. In typical walking pace currents, I can get as much as a 2-foot swing between my fastest sinking fly, my slowest sinking fly on the same sink tip or poly leader. I just have to change it up, and I'll get a much different sink rate. As I say, as much as 2 foot in a walking pace current between a high drag slow sinker and a low drag fast sinker. So remember that when you're trying to manage depth, don't automatically think, oh, I got to change my sink tip. You have other options with changing the fly, changing the leader, and if you've got a good selection that you've tied specifically to give you different sink rates, different penetration, you've got a lot of options right there in your fly box to switch out between slow sinking and fast sinking, high drag, low drag, long tippet, short tippet. With those things going on, you can really, really manage your depth quite well and quite precisely, incidentally. You can get pretty well where you want to go. So keep that in mind, and next time you're going down the river and you're either too high or too low, don't be going to change everything. Just change your tippet length, change the type of fly you're using, and you can make a significant change in the depth that fly is swinging. Cheers.